My guest today is Arthur von Wiesenberger, an award-winning executive producer and host of AnimalZone, the nationally syndicated television series that celebrates the powerful bond between humans and animals. Since its debut in 2018, AnimalZone has spotlighted hundreds of rescue stories, nonprofit sanctuaries, and wildlife initiatives across the globe, earning honors from the Ponza Film Awards, Accolade Global Film Competition, and the Telly Awards. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the host of AnimalZone, Arthur von Wiesenberger, to the show. Welcome,
Thank
Arthur.
you. Thank you, Ward. What a nice introduction.
Well, you're
Great
very,
to be
very
on your show.
welcome. Well, it's great to have you here, and I know that we're both animal lovers. Just before the show, you got to meet our little Cavalier Hazel, and where did the love for animals come from for you?
Well, I grew up with a lot of beautiful animals growing up on the East Coast. I used to live in New York. My parents had dogs, and there were frogs and rabbits and chipmunks and squirrels, all the great things that are out in the countryside. And those were my friends, my best friends. But I didn't really get committed to animals until later on in life, when I was watching some shows that were talking about some of the hard things that animals go through, and I felt really sad that animals have to suffer. And so Animal Zone came about really as a result of, you remember that ad that was going about back in 2017 or so, where Sarah McLachlan was singing a very sad, sad song, and you saw these animals in cages. That's where I went, wow, that's really depressing, and I wonder if it's doing any good, if it really is helping animals. So I talked to a friend of mine who was running a local shelter in Santa Barbara, and she said, no, it's actually working against us, because what happens, people see that ad and then they don't want to go to a shelter because it's going to be a depressing experience. And they're going to get their new family member, and they don't want to subject their kids to that sad environment. And the reality was that most shelters are not like the ones we saw in that commercial. Most shelters have become very luxurious. Some of them, you might say, are almost Four Seasons hotel-like for animals. But the other thing was that none of the money that they were getting was going to the shelters. So I thought, we got to flip this narrative a little bit. And instead of focusing on the negative, let's focus on the positive and show how these shelters are really the unsung heroes of the animal world. That they're doing incredible work. They're dedicating their lives to these animals, and they're doing good things both for the animals and for the local communities. And that was really how it got born.
Well, then you bring up a very good point, because I always hated when that commercial came on,
Me
because I
too.
knew that they were trying to pull the heartstrings, because I understand what advertising is. But I can see where it would have a negative impact, because if you're going to go to a shelter and you want to get a rescue, and they become a family member, and if you have kids, you want like you said, you want the children to have this positive, being excitement and joyful experience of looking and choosing out the next family member, and it
Mhm.
should be that way. So for you, because you started Animal Zone in 2018, what did you see in the animal world, especially with dogs and cats, during the pandemic?
Wow, that was a very interesting time, because when the pandemic hit, it was terrible for so many reasons, but it was actually very good for the shelters, because everybody suddenly was stuck at home. They were lonely, they missed the companionship of their friends, and so they went to get animals, and all the shelters emptied out of animals. There was actually a shortage of adoptable animals, even the least adoptable animals, the seniors, the injured ones, the difficult ones, they were getting adopted. So things really turned, and actually that's what sparked the show, which had started as a local show. We just started in the tri-counties of California. All of a sudden it was taken nationwide on Cox television, because people were really interested in animal welfare and rescuing animals.
Well, I know that you started the show in 2018, which as you said, was the reason of that commercial, and you wanted to show the positive side of, well, animals, the people, and all that goes into taking care of it. What were some of the first stories that you covered?
We started again with cats and dogs. That was really the initial genesis of this of the show, and we had rabbits as well. And we had some wonderful people come on who were specialists in each of those arenas, and they would tell us about behavioral issues. They would tell us about how to feed them, how to care for them. It was really an educational show for people who want to have animals. We also try to inspire people to adopt animals instead of going to a breeder or shopping for animals. And most of all, we tried to get people excited about supporting local shelters, whether it be in Hawaii or in Texas or in California, wherever you were, go first local because they're the ones who really need the money. Most of these are nonprofits or 501c3s that survive on donations and volunteers and people who foster animals. So that was our focus, showing how they work and what they're doing and the great heart behind these people. I mean, they really are. They love animals and they're doing things that are kind of God's work, if you will. So for me, it was a great connection just to work with such a fine group of folks, both domestically as we expanded internationally.
Well, you have a brand new season debuting in August. So, what types of stories are we going to expect to see?
Well, as I said, we started out with cats and dogs and rabbits. After a couple of years, we expanded to other animals because I've been rescuing animals as well. We had at home, we had not just a dog and three rescued cats, we also had two rescued donkeys and a rescued hinny, which is a mule. So I thought, we should explore the barnyard world a little bit and talk about pigs and goats and sheep and that kind of thing because there's a lot of those out there that are being rescued. And sure enough, great stories with these animals. And you realize how unique characters each one is. And so we went into the barnyard crowd. Well, that kind of gave way to wildlife. Suddenly, we were talking about everything from hawks and owls to sea turtles. And we thought, this is another area that really we need to explore because they're being rescued, they're being rehabilitated, and luckily, for most cases, re-released into nature. So we thought, well, that would be a good angle. Well, in Hawaii, we went one more step further. We went into insects. Now, I know
Insects as a pet?
not necessarily as a pet, but as a companion to a lifestyle. Because what we focused in on was the Hawaiian honeybee. And the Hawaiian honeybee creates some of the most ethereal honey I've ever tasted. And it's to do with all the wonderful tropical plants and flowers that the honeybees capture and they bring home and create into this amazing honey. And so we found a honeybee expert, and she has her own little business called Bird and Bee Hawaii, and she has her honey hives. And she started explaining what bees do, and they're remarkable. I mean, yes, they make great honey. They also pollinate everything, and which ultimately creates food for all of us. And they have great ways of communicating. She brought us into her hives. I had to wear the whole white suit with the head cover, making sure we didn't get stung. And originally, I was going to go and I usually have a black shirt, which has the AnimalZone logo. I was going to go on it. She says, "Don't do that." I go, "Why?" She says, "Because all these bees will think you're a bear coming to get their honey, and they'll sting you. So you don't want to wear black around bees." So I had the white outfit on. We went into the hive and she starts pulling up these frames. It's what they call frames, and each frame had a different stage of what the honeybees were doing. The first one was making the honeycomb. The next frame, it showed the bees putting honey into the honeycomb. And the next frame showed the queen bee, and she was laying eggs in the honeycomb. So it was kind of remarkable. And then she explained, as we were watching these bees doing little circles around one another, I said, "What's that?" And she says, "Well, that's the waggle dance." And I go, "What's the waggle dance?" She says, "Well, that's how the bees tell the other bees where there's some good plants and good potential food for the honey." And they describe the distance, the relationship of the sun to where they are, and how long it will take to get there. And the further away it is, the more circles they do. It's amazing.
Wow, that is communication I have never heard. And I knew that bees would do their own little dance to communicate, but you've given the best explanation I've ever heard about it. And I'm really glad you focused, doing an episode on the bees because, we both know that the overall bee population has decreased over the years.
It's a serious issue, and you really want. We had some honeybees, and when the queen leaves, that's kind of the end of the hive, unless you can find another queen. Fortunately, there's a lot of people now that are concerned about this, and they're trying to start hives again with new queens. These beekeepers are really wonderful, wonderful folks that are doing great work. We're really lucky to have them both on continental United States as well as in Hawaii and elsewhere in the world.
Well, let me ask you this, Arthur. What is the most unusual rescue you have ever seen?
Wow, that's an interesting question because sometimes the most unusual rescues are the ones you would predict. I mean, actually, I can tell you my own personal rescue was pretty unusual, even though it was a standard dog. We I had no intention, by the way, of rescuing a dog. I was with my significant other. We were down in a town called Carpinteria, and they were having an adopt a dog event at a local pet store. We walked by, and in this cage was this really cute looking black and white dog. And I looked at the dog, and it kind of reminded me of the dog that was on Spanky and the gang. Not didn't quite have the white patch, but had white and black patches. And the woman who was doing the event said, "Oh, this would be a great dog to adopt." And I went, "Really? What kind of dog is it?" "Oh," she said, "Well, it's mostly boxer." I said, "Oh, okay." So we went and had lunch, talked about, do we really want to adopt a dog? Are we ready to take on that responsibility? And after lunch, we said, yeah, we could give it a try. So we come back, find out that this dog has had all kinds of injuries. The dog was raised originally by a breeder who wanted to have fighting dogs. And well, it was just horrible. And then the dog got hit by a car, and I guess the breeder didn't wanted to fix the injury, and so the leg grew in incorrectly, and then it had to have multiple surgeries to repair that. We go, wow, we're going to be taking on a real responsibility with this dog. But the more we looked at the dog and the more we thought about it, we said, we could do this. We could help this dog. So we got the dog, and a couple more surgeries later, which was not cheap, and then a lot of water therapy and laser therapy. The legs started working properly, and the dog was a great companion. His name was Mikey, and we said, well, let's find out what kind of dog Mikey is, because it just didn't look quite like a box. He didn't look like anything. He had big paws and a giant head. We used to call him Chucklehead because it was so big, and he always had a smile. And so I said, well, what kind of dog is it? So we sent in the DNA, and it comes back 100% pit bull, which unfortunately back then nobody was adopting pit bulls, so that's why they were sort of had a bad rap. But the most wonderful dog.
Yeah,
But
they get a bad rap. I've always heard that before they got the bad rap, they are one of the best family dogs, highly
yes,
protective of the family.
hmm
Um, they make wonderful pets. Unfortunately, they have a bad reputation from caused by bad people and bad breeding practices, which is why, we've heard the term, gator mouth.
yeah,
And
yeah.
because those have been bred incorrectly.
Yeah, and they've got the biggest heart, and the only time he would never do anything negative to anybody. He was just funny. He was hilarious. We used to sit and watch TV together, and I'd laugh, and it looked like he was laughing as well. Wonderful animal. If a child in a store was crying, he'd pull me over to the child because he wanted to see if he could help her. It was,
Oh,
then that's the way they are. They have that great, like you said, kind of a protective, nurturing ability, especially for family members.
well, you had. I went back and I watched some Animal Zone episodes, and one of them caught my eye because I was like I'm watching it as an audience member, and it was it was the one you did with the Saint Bernards,
Ah,
and I love that episode because I didn't know what the barrels were used for, and you met our little Cavalier Hazel, and we'd always thought for Halloween we need to get her a little barrel to carry because she looks like a miniature Saint Bernard in the face. So I just loved that type of story because it was educational. But who doesn't love a Saint Bernard? One of my dear friends who has passed, he owned 8 Saint Bernards in his lifetime. He just
Wow.
absolutely loved the breed.
They are such loving, wonderful animals. You have to like drool because they do drool a lot, but they are so sweet and they're so iconic, especially in Switzerland, which is where that was filmed. That was filmed in a little town called Martigny, which is in the southern part of Switzerland. And they have a foundation that just nurtures St. Bernards. Originally, years ago, up at the top of the St. Bernard Pass was a monastery where all these St. Bernards were kept. And they were there to help rescue hikers and skiers and people who might get lost up on the mountains and find them. And that was really their job, and they were great at it. What's amazing is dogs, especially, have a great sense of going after and saving people who are in trouble. In the paper this week, there's a story that took place also in Switzerland, in southern Switzerland, where a man fell into a crevasse in a glacier, 25 feet fall, and his little dog that was with him, which is a little Chihuahua, rescued him. How do you rescue him? The dog was standing by where he had fallen. The man luckily had a walkie-talkie, and he called Air Zermatt Rescue. They came, but they had no idea where he was until they spotted the little dog who didn't move from where the man was. And they finally found him, rescued the man. Of course, the dog was a great hero, and it's a little Chihuahua. It's amazing.
Yeah, my mighty things come in small packages, and we had a Chihuahua, so they are an interesting little pet all their own. But in your program, Animal Zone, it has a strong focus on education and compassion for animals. How do you balance the entertainment factor with efficacy in your episodes?
Well, I think that how we start these shows is, I mean, right now I'm planning. We're going to be starting to film later this year in Florida, and so in doing the pre-production, I talk with these different shelters and rescues and sanctuaries, and listen to how the animals are. First of all, are they being well cared for? Uh, are they healthy? Are the people who are looking after them doing the right thing for the right reason? And then I asked to hear their stories from the people. And then you kind of know, well, yeah, this is going to be a good episode because their heart's in the right place. They've got some interesting story to tell, and the animals are going to be. I mean, they're the stars of the show for sure. And so we kind of zero in on that way and let the animals tell the story pretty much. Let the people explain it, and that's the education. I mean, I'll just ask questions like you. You're a great interviewer. People love your show because you explore the questions that they would ask, and I think that's what I've learned is ask the questions that a viewer will ask, and that way they get the education.
I agree with that, and I thank you for the compliment. And lately, I guess let's just go back maybe just a couple of years up until present day. Here in the United States, we have had some pretty big natural disasters.
Mhm.
Have you ever filmed after one of those to see how the pets and the animals are either rescued or taken care of after one of those natural disasters?
Well, we haven't actually been in a place where a disaster had recently happened. We've dealt with dogs that have been rescued from disasters. When we were filming up in Northern California, at one of the shelters up near the peninsula, they had just gotten delivery of some dogs that had been rescued from the Hawaii fires on Maui. And these dogs they'd not found the owners. They didn't have any chips, so they couldn't find who they belonged to or who they were. And after trying multiple ways to try and get them reunited, they sent them to a shelter because they didn't have enough space in their shelters. Their shelters were full. So they sent them to the mainland, and these dogs, dogs are wonderful because they're very forgiving. They could be in a disaster, they could be hurt, they could a lot of things happen, but they take every day as a new day. And as long as you give them shelter and food and oceans of love, they're happy. And these dogs were just great. They were obviously displaced and they'd gone through some trauma, but they were ready to meet their, who's going to look after me next. And luckily they found them.
Exactly. Well, let me ask you something because I know with the explosion of TikTok and with Instagram, and we see a lot of these animal videos and these stories. And I'll use the donkey for example. Everybody's falling in love with these baby donkeys or the miniature donkeys, and these things can become a fad for a lot of people.
Mm.
What is your take on that? And are people in a way being irresponsible?
Well, I think whenever someone decides they want to adopt or rescue an animal, they really have to do some soul searching first to make sure that they're making the right decision. And a great way is to talk to a local shelter and say, what's involved with having this as a pet? I mean, some animals, horses, for example, are very expensive to have as a pet. I mean, vet bills can go through the roof. You're going through a lot of hay. You've got to have their hoofs trimmed all the time. There's a lot of things that go on to keep a horse healthy and in good shape. So, A, can you make that kind of commitment? And B, you want to spend time with these animals. You've got to not, just leave an animal and think, oh, well, I come back from, vacation. I'll spend a day or half a day or an hour with the dog. No, no, you've got to be there for those animals. And that's so important. Um, so I'd really encourage people to first do their research about what they're getting. And some animals are, donkeys, for example, are less maintenance than a horse. Donkeys are very interesting creatures. They're equines, of course, but they're not as dependent upon the herd factor. As long as you have two donkeys, they'll be very happy because they like to have a pal. But they forage a lot, so if you have a lot of grasses, depending on the grasses, they can be just fine with that and water. They're very good as far as watch animals. If you have a donkey, they'll start braying if anything comes onto the property. I've noticed our donkey Watson, he'll bray the moment a coyote walks on the property, which most coyotes decide, well, maybe this isn't for me. And then, but also people, if they come on and they don't know the people, or even if they do, they'll bray. So you have a watchdog in a way, and a very large one.
Yeah, they're actually some of my favorite videos to watch, like on Instagram, because I never realized how affectionate donkeys
Ah,
can be, and they have an incredible memory.
yes, they do. And like Watson, who we rescued Watson off of BLM land. The Bureau of Land Management was clearing donkeys off of certain parts of California and Arizona, and they were penning them all up. And you could go there and for very little rescue a donkey and take him home. Uh, and so he was just a little baby donkey, so sweet. And as he got bigger, he got to become kind of almost like a mammoth donkey. He was huge. He is huge. And he would put his head on my shoulder and look at me right in the eye. And the weight of the head would make my shoulder drop down, but it's still the most loving moment. Whenever I see him, I just melt.
I just love that. I love that. And then sometimes I see these videos where people are turning cows into pets, which I think is the craziest thing. And then, of course, we see the craze of the miniature cows and people having them in their home. And of course, they make everything look wonderful, but behind the scenes, it's probably a little bit of a mess, I would say.
It could well be. When we were in Hawaii filming a couple of months ago, we went to a cow sanctuary called the Krishna Cow Sanctuary, and it's near Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii. And what they have, there was a dairy that was being shut down, and they were going to send all the cows to be butchered, unfortunately. Well, luckily, this group decided they'd rescue these cows and take care of them. And the way they fund it is they have a sign on the road that says, "Come cuddle a cow." So for a donation, you can go into their sanctuary. They have a lovely barn set up where you can sit down, and all the cows are lying down, and you can just cuddle with them. And the cows are very affectionate. They love being rubbed under their chins, and they'll moo. So they're wonderful. And the little calves, of course, are adorable. You don't want to leave them either. But
Yeah, those
it's an interesting time in animal attraction. Yes, cows are becoming a very popular animal.
it is. Now for you, I mean, what goes into actually creating an episode? I mean, do topics just pop into your head, or is there something that you see and you're like, wait a minute, we need to do an episode about that?
That's pretty much how it is. We hear about something now that we almost have 200 episodes out completed. So we're hearing from people who've seen the show say, oh, we've got this kind of sanctuary here. We got this kind of rescue. Or have you ever done something on opossums? And things like that. And all of a sudden, yeah, that goes into the head and we write down those ideas and I reach out to them, track them down and say, would you be interested? That's what I'm doing right now in Florida. And we're finding that, in the Florida Keys, which I've never been to, there is so much animal rescue stuff that's amazing. One place we're going to go to is the Monroe County Sheriff's Animal Farm. And when I first heard about it, I said, what is this animal farm in the sheriff's department? Well, it turned out that the prison that was in Key West had some ducks that were living underneath the building, and the prisoners who were, obviously staying there for a while, would go down and they would feed the ducks. And there was a wonderful blossoming that happened, according to the sheriff, that these prisoners were, because they were caring for an animal, they became softer, more humane, if you will. And as the story got out, other animal owners around the area who had animals they needed to find a shelter for or whatever went to the Monroe County Sheriff's Department and said, "Can you take my pig, please, or take my emu, or take this and whatever?" So he slowly started to build up. Now they got over 130 animals, and they have a dedicated person who looks after them, and the prisoners come and look after them, and most of the prisoners are much better off. And of course, the animals are great because they get all this attention.
I
So I think it's going to be a good story.
Oh, I can't wait to see that episode because when I'm hearing you tell this story and I'm thinking that really helps people to gain and understand empathy. And when they become that type of person, to me, that's true change. And who would have ever thought that an animal would have that much power?
Yeah, no, animals are. I mean, look as here's a story that we shot this in Japan last year. We went to a nursing home outside of Tokyo. And this nursing home was run by a man who had spent a lot of time doing hospice work. So he had seen how animals had helped hospice patients uh, just sort of adapt to unfortunately the end of life. And then he opened the nursing home and he wanted to have animals in the nursing home. Well, there was a law in Japan that animals were not allowed inside hospital facilities. So he petitioned the local government in the area he was in and said, "This is really going to be good, and please let me try it." And so they, after a lot of back and forth, they finally came up with a solution that they were going to have one floor which was for patients who had dogs, and another floor for patients who had cats. And neither of the two will mix. But in any case, sure enough, people started having animals in their rooms, and it was great. We went to see a woman who was, she must have been near 100, maybe late 90s. And she had her little dog at the foot of her bed. She was bedridden for the most part. But both the dog and the little Japanese woman were so content and so happy and so at peace. And you go, this is what we should be doing. This is great stuff that this guy came up with. And I hope that other facilities might consider looking into the possibility of letting people have animals even at the end of life.
Yeah, I love that. I've seen segments somewhere where a hospital would allow, not just an emotional support dog, but sometimes in rare occasions they would bring either a miniature horse or a horse in for a day, and it helps just to pick up the spirits of the patients. And it's amazing the power of the animals, and of course, animals just I think they just carry a spirit of love and they love, people to take care of them, but at the same time, they're also taking care of us.
That's right. They have the biggest heart, and you get unconditional love from an animal. There's nothing quite like that.
Now, with your show Animal Zone, I noticed that you partner up with sanctuaries, shelters, even conservation groups. Uh, how do you vet those for your show? Because one of the elements of your show that I really loved, instead of doing the sad shelter commercial, you bring this positive. I guess there's a shelter that's on your show. It's a very positive type commercial where when I was watching it, for some reason, my mind was like, where's that shelter? Because it made me watch the three pictures of the dogs, and I'm like, now which one would I pick? So it was a very
Oh,
positive, encouraging
yeah.
spot. So, how do you vet these places?
Well, first of all, it's great we have the internet because that's a good place to start. And I make sure that the shelter is a nonprofit. Uh, one of the things we don't do zoos. We don't do where animals are used for entertainment. We really focus on where animal welfare is number one, that they're being rescued and either they're going to be rehomed or they're going to be looked after for the rest of their lives. So that's sort of our mission and criteria to fall within those corners. But as far as when you talk with the people who run the shelter, you really get a good sense. People are pretty transparent, especially if they talk about animals and they have a love for animals. If they don't have a love for animals, yeah, maybe they're not the right people for us. But as I said, most of these shelters have such dedicated people that have donated their life to animal welfare. They're not going to make much money. I mean, this is not a big business by far. In fact, it's probably one of the worst businesses out there because they end up having to dig into their own pockets to feed these animals and pay vet bills and all that. So it's a labor of love. It goes beyond the normal things in life. And that's why I think it's a celebration for these folks because we want to spotlight them. We want to make sure that the world, even if it's just their local world, know that they're there and what they're doing so that they can get support.
I love that. I love that. Now, I'm going to have a two-part question. What's the funniest moment you've ever had on set? And have you ever had a scary moment on set?
Wow. Well, let's see. Recently, I was at a rescue in Hawaii, and it was a beautiful location, great animals, and this woman who was a former realtor in California had bought this beautiful piece of land. It was in Maui, beautiful piece, beautiful area, and it was like Noah's Ark. All the animals were getting on with each other. The pigs were getting on with the goats. There were guinea pigs running around in the field. I've never seen guinea pigs running around wild like that, but they were all really happy and really sweet and all that stuff. But this is just as nice as it can possibly get. And so we walk around, and there's a turkey uh, and I look at the turkey and I go, oh hi, and I always try and talk to animals. I think it's a good thing to communicate. Just they'll pick up your feelings or what you're thinking. Well, I don't know if I must have said something wrong to this turkey because all of a sudden the turkey starts attacking my hand and drawing blood. And I'm going, wow. I said, I'm sorry, whatever I did. I know I ate a turkey sandwich years ago, but I've given up on turkey sandwiches. And at any rate, that was not necessarily scary, but it was a little bit uncomfortable for a moment. As far as funny, you know, all animals have a sense of humor. They really do. And they you kind of can see it in their eyes sometimes, a twinkle that they have. Uh, Dogs, especially, dogs are remarkable animals, and we've had so many great dogs. Going back to the Saint Bernard you were talking about earlier, there was a Saint Bernard that was so sweet, and the Saint Bernard came over, and I started petting the Saint Bernard. This didn't get on camera because I was petting the Saint Bernard, and all of a sudden the Saint Bernard sneezes and slurp all this stuff all over me. I mean, they have so much saliva in their mouth because they have this big chunky mouth that I had to take a break and take a shower. Well, wash off a bit of it. That was, of course, the crew thought that was hilarious. Me, I'm not laughing that much, but it was okay.
Yeah, when I watched when I watched the Saint Bernard episode, I thought it
Hmm.
was so funny because the woman that you were interviewing, she said, well, because you had asked the question about the drool. And she says, it's always going to be there, and you have to understand that when they shake their head, it could end up in your hair or end up on the ceiling. And I thought that was the funniest thing when she said that. I'm like, how many people realize that's going to happen when they adopt a Saint Bernard?
No, it's a special surprise, but you know what? They're such lovable animals. It's worth it.
Yeah. So, what has been the fan feedback to the show? Because you must get a lot of stories from viewers.
We do get a lot of feedback from viewers, and they go to our website, they watch it there, they have an instant way to email us and let us know what they thought. What I love, what I we get more often than not, are pictures of them watching the show with their pets, and I've noticed it at home too when I have the show on. My cats will sit and watch the show because they're curious to see what's going on the screen. And animals love watching other animals, or at least they've seen movement that looks intriguing to them. And so we get some of those shots. Somebody once sent me a video of a little boy and his dog watching the show and laughing, and I went, "Oh, that's great." So it's we're entertaining people and animals, which is a good combination.
Well, I love that. You are an absolute wonderful host of Animal Zone. So, what are your hopes for the future of the show?
Well, from where we are now, we are still expanding. There's so many places to go and so many things to see because different cultures have different ways of dealing with animals. The Japanese culture was so different from what's happening out in the United States. The older generation, probably had less of a concern about the animal welfare than the younger Japanese generation. They are really involved with dog rescue and cat rescue, and they're terrific people for animals. You see it all over. In Switzerland, completely different environment. They are very ahead of us in many ways as far as animal welfare. For example, the iconic Swiss mountain scene with the cows going through the mountains and the bells ringing and all that. Well, they did a study and they found out that this bell ringing was stressful for the cows, and that the milk that the cow was producing, if they were wearing a bell, was not as good quality as the milk that cows not wearing bells were producing. And they figured that it was a combination of the bell ringing, the noise, the stress, and the weight. So now they're starting to switch out all these big old cowbells for little geo trackers because that's the reason they had the bell on, was so that the farmer, could find their cows at the end of the day in the fields. So now they have a little tracker, they can track right down where they are. The cows producing much better milk and cheeses, and everybody seems to be happy, especially the cows.
I love that, Arthur. And where can all of my viewers and listeners find your show?
Well, we welcome, of course, on our website, which is animalzone.org. You can see right now we have 180 episodes up there. By the end of the year, we'll have 200. You can see all those episodes there, and you can also watch them on streaming platforms like Tubi, Plex, Pluto, Roku, Vimeo. And then if you are on the Cox Television cable network nationally, we're on every Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. And that's across the country.
I love that, Arthur. And ladies and gentlemen, Animal Zone is a family friendly television program for animal lovers across the globe as Arthur travels across the globe to bring us these incredible stories of not just the animals, but also the people. And every episode will put a smile on your face and you'll learn something each time you watch. And Arthur, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the program, sharing Animal Zone with me today.
Ward, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, and we hope we'll see you again somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, head over to animalzone.org and check out the hundreds of episodes of Animal Zone. And you're going to be just like me. You're going to fall in love with these episodes. You're going to fall in love with the animals. And of course, you're going to love the people who take care of them. So, again, animalzone.org. And for all of you, well, you can either see me daily on the Dr. Ward Bond Show, as well as my other show, Bond on Cinema. So you either go to drwardbond.com our bondoncinema.com and check out our Prime show, our YouTube channels, and you can find us also on Spotify, iTunes, and Audible and more. I want to thank you for watching because you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.